There we go. Awesome. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to the final installment of our Career Insights series for the fall semester, Career Insights, Careers in Nonprofits. My name is Jihyun Ju. I'm an advisor and program coordinator here at Beyond Barnard. We'll be hearing from 4 Barnard alums today. Thank you so much to our panelists for making the time to join us. The bios of our alums, I'm going to drop it in the chat in a hot second. There's going to be an audience Q&A toward the end of our program. So for our students in the room who are interested in asking our panelists a question, feel free to unmute yourself when the time comes. You can also drop questions into the chat as well. All right. So to get started, we'll do introductions. So for our panelists, what is your current role and what sparked your initial interest in the work that you're doing now? And anyone can jump in.
Go ahead, Idira. Okay, thanks, Hannah. Hi, everyone. My name is Idira, and I use she, her pronouns. And I just got a new job. So I'm 1 month in to being the Alumni Support and College Success Coordinator with Bright Star Schools, which is a charter school system here in Los Angeles, California, which is where I'm born and raised. And part of the reason why I decided to go into education was just from my lived experience. I was a part of multiple nonprofits in education when I was growing up in high school. So I wanted to give back. And also, I come from a family of educators. My grandmother was a teacher. My mom is a special education administrator. So education has always been in my world of what I wanted to do professional wise. But I'm really excited to just do this work every day. And I really do enjoy it. So, yeah.
I'll hop in. I'm Hannah Mackler. I currently work at the 92nd Street Y, New York, as the Director of Government and UJ Relations, focusing on getting government grants. And I actually credit Barnard for sparking my interest in nonprofit work. I'd always loved dance, and then I took dance in New York City. Shout out to Katie Glasner. And I actually went to the 92nd Street Y for the first time through that program, among other organizations. I worked at other theaters, nonprofits. And that class told me, it's not just about the people on stage, the people backstage. There's also the infrastructure that needs to be there to support the arts. And there are jobs in art admin, including fundraising or development. And that kind of set me on the path.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dia Basusen, and I'm Executive Director of SEPNA NYC. We are a community-based grassroots organization that works with South Asian immigrant women and families around addressing health inequities, women's empowerment, and building community power. So I guess kind of what sparked my interest in this current work is I have a background in public health, but also I am the daughter of immigrants from India. And so I just liked the way that this organization kind of combined a lot of my interests and skills.
I can close this out. So my name is Soyeon Kim. I am a plan giving officer at the International Rescue Committee, otherwise known as the IRC. I also, like everyone, credit Barnard. I was really lucky to get my first internship with an NGO that was doing work at the United Nations when I was in college, and they really opened my doors to the nonprofit and NGO world, and I have been stuck ever since. So, I really credit Barnard for financially supporting me through that and kind of kicking off my career.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much. Because you guys do very different roles within the nonprofit sector, I'm curious to hear about what your day-to-day work looks like, and anyone can jump in.
I'm happy to start us off. I guess the one thing about being the executive director of a small nonprofit is that your day-to-day looks different every day, pretty much. And you wear a lot of different hats that aren't maybe a traditional executive director role. So because of that, right now I'm hybrid. So today I'm working from home. A lot of my work has been phone calls and meetings and doing grant writing or finance and things like that. But I also find myself, attending workshops or facilitating, writing curriculum, doing staff oversight. So it really is a little bit of everything, which for me has been something that's really exciting. I like to have different things, but it's also obviously a lot of juggling and can be stressful as well.
So I work in fundraising and development for a very, very large international nonprofit, which means that a lot of my time is spent talking to donors who are giving us substantially large gifts, which means that you're constantly building relationships, meeting with donors, trying to figure out why they support a humanitarian aid organization. And then similarly, we're also in a lot of kind of learning, lunch and learns. We're doing a lot of information sessions. So that way, because of the nature of the work that I'm doing, it's across the world and really requires us to be very politically aware of what's happening around the world and what those needs are. So, building those relationships with our programs teams, with different kinds of people across my organization, and then also just becoming better informed of what's going on in the world. So when we go out to see our donors, we can tell them up front what's going on.
And I'm going to piggyback off of Soyeon since I'm also in development. So in addition to the external work, kind of as Soyeon was mentioning, there's a lot of internal meetings also. So specifically with grants, I spend a lot of time talking with my colleagues who are actually running the programs, working with them to kind of translate their vision for funders and for the public. Getting details from our finance team. I never thought I would actually use algebra in my job, but I do have to sometimes. And really getting all of the details straight for the story that we do tell to funders. My day, though, I work remotely currently, although I'm in the vast minority of my organization. Everyone else is in person or hybrid. So I do spend my whole day at the computer, participating in meetings via Zoom or phone.
And I also am hybrid. I'm at home as well. I think that's one of the perks of working in a nonprofit space is very flexible. But I am very student facing with my work since I am in the college access and success space. Most of my work is with students in terms of having check-ins and doing one-on-one Zoom calls to just help them through whatever academic or financial aid challenges they might be having. And every student is different. So one day I may be doing research on certificate programs they can apply to, and the next day I might be signing in with them onto their FAFSA application to see what's going on with their financial aid and what they're eligible for. And then also I do spend a lot of time at the schools that I work with. I currently support 2 high schools. So whatever it is that they're doing related to college access, I'm usually on the ground with them, helping their students, whether that be filling out college applications, working on personal statements and personal insight questions. Since I am in California, definitely do a lot of that for the UC system. And then in my prior role, which was really cool, I worked at an educational nonprofit called C5LA, and they are a leadership development organization. So some of my day-to-day actually looked like just being outside, doing community service with the students. This past summer, I went backpacking for the first time with them. I was in Seattle for 10 days and I was trekking with the students. It was a great experience, something that I don't think I would have ever done without that organization. So definitely does look different throughout my whole academic year. And then the summers are pretty busy for us since that's when we can get a hold of our students and put on a lot of programming since they're not in classes.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I know a couple of you guys credited Barnard in your introductions, but thinking on your career trajectory thus far, what opportunities did you find to be nourishing for you in getting involved in your current field? It could be internships, fellowships, anything that you've come across, even within like the academic sphere as well. And 2-part question, what skill sets have been most transferable to other positions that you've pursued? And anyone can get us started.
I'm gonna start us off. Sorry if you hear my dog in the background. But I have an interesting trajectory into the nonprofit space because I didn't originally think I was going to be working within the nonprofit space. I went into Barnard thinking I was going to be an entertainment lawyer. I majored in political science. I interned at law firms while I was at Barnard, and I literally was through and through on that path up until graduation. So once I graduated from Barnard, I was kind of doing a little bit of soul searching and figuring out what I wanted to do, what really brought me joy. And luckily, I was able to look back on my experiences of interning and realizing this isn't potentially something that I want to do. So I just came back home and went back to what I was familiar with. And those were the organizations I was a part of in high school. So I went back to volunteer at Thrive Scholars. It was originally called SCS Noonan Scholars, but I went back to them. I went back to this organization called College Match and was really talking with the students and trying to put two and two together of how can I do this for work? Like, how did these people get into this space? How did you become a executive director idea, or how did you become a college counselor within this field? And it all led me to a graduate program. So I had a friend who literally on Instagram posted that they graduated from Pepperdine School of Public Policy in education policy. I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. So I started there and just did some backwards research and found out a lot about Master in Public Administration and Master in Public Policy programs, and how those were programs that would allow you to have a really great impact in education in terms of creating policies that support students of color, that support college access, which is what I was so familiar with. So I would say the one thing that helped me get into this field was doing my master's program, because I did not have any previous experience in the nonprofit space professionally, rather than being a part of these organizations as a participant. So my master's program pretty much taught me the ins and outs of a nonprofit program or a nonprofit organization. I learned about boards, I learned about funding, I took nonprofit management courses, and I also was able to focus a lot on education policy. And for my graduate program at the University of Washington, I went to the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance. It's required that you do an internship. So I was able to intern at the UW in their academic advising department, and I worked within the support system for their students in their undergraduate programs that were needing academic success skills and tutoring. And that really just gave me my skills that I have transferred into my roles now. So being a college counselor, being a college success director, I really did utilize the skills of counseling that I gained from my internships in grad school. And that's definitely helped me through now in terms of just knowing how to be there for a student comprehensively and understanding that every student is different, every student has different lived experiences, and how to be empathetic, how to be understanding, and how to provide that comprehensive support was something that I don't think I would have been able to do if I didn't go into my graduate program.
I'm happy to go from there. I think in the beginnings, I think we have some overlap. So at Barnard, I was pre-med and I went through everything. I did all the courses. I graduated thinking that I would go to medical school, but I never really envisioned myself being like a doctor in a hospital. Like I always thought more that I would be in a clinic or like a community health center, something like that. And then I actually had never really even thought about or even really maybe known about public health as like kind of a degree in a field. So I ended up deciding that potentially I would do my public health degree first and then maybe go to medical school. So I did a master's it's a MS in global health and population from Harvard. And at first I thought, okay, like after this, I'll go to med school. And then I thought that really for the work that I wanted to do, it wasn't really necessary, and that it was like a lot more commitment of time and money and resources, and that it just wasn't necessarily something that I needed to do the work that I wanted to do. So after that, I did some work with African Service Committee around HIV, and I did different things like that, like short-term things. And then I found myself ending up actually working in a corporate setting. And I think and from there, I went into SUPNO, which is where I am now. And I think what I was really looking for when I made that transition is having a job where at the end of the day, I felt really good about like what I had contributed to, like moving the world into like a better place, moving people forward, making kind of a positive impact on someone's life in some way. And I just wasn't necessarily getting that in the work that I was doing. So I had reached out to SUPNet actually to volunteer as I was thinking about kind of what my next step was. And it turns out that they had a position and we ended up talking. And so long story short, I ended up working there. But so it wasn't necessarily like I envisioned myself being an executive director. And I actually didn't have training or like a degree that was in that. So I think, I mean, even today, right, it's been a very much work in progress and me figuring a lot of things out as I'm doing it. But I think kind of what I really enjoy is being in a space where I have, like, at the end of the day, again, I have that feeling that I've made a positive impact. And I'm able to move both like kind of my community, my organization, and some of the policy as well forward.
So I think I had a very different trajectory, which is always good to have compare and contrast. So I went to Barnard kind of determined to become a journalist or a writer, like many of us do as English majors. And I did end up doing that. I studied writing at Barnard, and I also studied Middle Eastern studies. And what I kind of learned as I was doing a lot of these internships and kind of these paid internships through Barnard, because they gave me a stipend and things like that. And what I really learned was that similar to what Dia was saying, was that I really wanted my work at the end of the day to have a positive impact. I kind of was questioning if I really wanted to go to corporate or not, or into the for-profit sector. And I kind of got burnt out at the UN. I loved it, but I had a lot of questions around what purpose it was serving. And I ended up going into smaller NGOs. And I actually applied to the IRC when I was 23 and a little confused about where I wanted to head to next. And I got flat out rejected 3 times. And I kind of had to learn in that moment of, oh, I wonder like what else I have to do in my career to be able to get to the IRC, which kind of was my goal since I was 23. And, it meant that I have to go work at different nonprofits. It meant that I had to go work at different large scale, small scale, international work, local work, and really diversify my experiences. But I do think that what I learned at Barnard, which was like really great communication skills, being able to build really strong relationships with people, just being very like intellectually curious at the end of the day about what you want to do, and having that passion, I think kind of at the end of the day really helped me drive into the role that I'm in now. I also went to SEPA for grad school, and I just realized in my bio that I graduated a year earlier than I actually did. So I graduated this last May. I swear I'm not making things up. But my SEPA education was really transformative. And I think to Dara's point, right, like grad school does have a lot of costs that go with it. But I think if you find a way to kind of, like work with that, I do think that my time at SEPA was incredibly beneficial. I learned so much, and I learned all these kind of different skill sets, and was a really great refresh to what I had initially started learning at Barnard. And I got really lucky in that I got my IRC job kind of while I was at SEPA. The other thing too is also I feel like in every step of this way, I've met someone who went to Barnard. Barnard women are everywhere. It's kind of terrifying. But when I was at the UN, I was working with people at Barnard. When I started my job at TFA, I met donors who had gone to Barnard. In the IRC, I have colleagues who went to Barnard. So, there's a lot of us out there, and I think a lot of us are really eager to network and to talk to each other. Really, those kind of strong bonds that you created at Barnard definitely carry through in real life.
All right, I'll wrap this up. So I actually did not go to grad school. So I think that's one of the things, depending on which field you go into, some put more of an emphasis on it than others. There are definitely plenty of people I know who in the arts administration field who do have MBAs, who do have, masters in arts administration, and that has helped them, but it is also possible to proceed in your career without that degree. So definitely something worth considering. I had internships at Barnard. That's kind of what set me on this path at dance companies, which was my original passion. And then Also got stipend through career services, which super helpful. And then after college, I got a year-long fellowship at Arena Stage in DC, which is a regional theater. And it was a special program specifically for people emerging in the arts. It was paid, not a lot, but paid. Got to live in DC or in the DC area. And that's where I found a mentor. And I think finding a mentor in your path is super helpful. She literally took a folder, which in those, it wasn't that long ago, but we did send paper in those days, took a folder, showed me the printed proposal, printed attachments, which could include anything from photos to stories, and really took me step by step through the process. And also through the whole fellowship experience, I met with different people, artists in the organization, and learned the different roles. So I really had a better understanding of the infrastructure. So even if you don't have a specific fellowship program, if you're low, in an entry-level job, I would still try to understand the other roles around you. And in terms of transferable skills, I think storytelling is the skill. It's something we definitely learned at Barnard. It's about taking ideas and understanding them for yourself and then helping to tell the story for everyone else. So I think that has carried me through.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I love what you said about storytelling, Hannah. That really spoke to me. So I feel that you have all sort of been doing this a bit in your answers, but what advice would you give to students who are interested in pursuing a career in nonprofits but are unsure of where to start?
I think for one of the things I would say is just to think about also like what you actually want out of your experience, or like what's important to you, because as you see from us right on this call, but also like outside of these kind of groups you have here, there's such a wide breadth and diversity to nonprofit work, and it can look a lot of different ways and it can do a lot of different things. So I think if you just say like I'm interested in nonprofit, like I don't want to say it doesn't mean anything, but it's like such a large, vague kind of thing that I think you need to dig a little bit deeper about like what actually about nonprofit work interests you. Like what are the things that are important to you and what are the kind of experiences that you would like? Because right, you'll get a very different experience if you like right, IRC or UN, right, like compared to working at a community-based organization. It's going to be a completely different job, for better or worse. And so it has to be kind of a fit that makes sense for you and what you're looking for and what you want to do. I also always recommend volunteering, like if you're able, or looking at kind of internships or things like that, because it gives you an idea of things that maybe you didn't even think about. I know for myself, like I didn't know, like I knew about nonprofit work, but I don't think I realized all the different roles that go into nonprofit work. So that even within the same organization, right, you could do something more in management, you could do more direct service, you can do more administrative or development communications, right? There's so many different ways to be involved in nonprofits. And sometimes we don't think of all of those different roles that make up an organization. So kind of thinking about what appeals to you, maybe trying out different things. Or if you're really not sure, maybe trying it out in a smaller nonprofit where you actually will be able to do a lot of different things. So like my deputy director, who I worked with for a couple of years, right, she now works in development, and in a larger nonprofit, she would have never touched like a grant or done any of that. But because we're small, right, she had hands-on experience doing that and decided that's like what she wanted to pursue further. So I think one of the things is the smaller the nonprofit, the more likely you're going to do different things in different areas. So if you're really unsure, that might be a way for you to try different things and see what about being in a nonprofit actually appeals to you, or like what area.
Yeah, to piggyback off of Dia, I agree that you really spend a lot of time thinking about the impact that you want to make and where you want to make the impact. The size of an organization also really affects your work style. So as Dia mentioned, a smaller nonprofit gives you the chance to kind of dip your fingers in a lot of things and really test things out and see what really works for you. Nonprofits have so many different facets, whether it's the programmatic work you're doing, the fundraising or external work that you're doing, or just general administration. So, I really encourage you to work for smaller nonprofits and see if that's really what you want to do. And, also keep in mind that the larger the nonprofit, it's almost like a corporation, right? Like the larger a nonprofit is, the more bureaucracy there is, the more that you kind of have to wade through the weeds. And so, just spend a lot of time like deliberately thinking about what you want to do. And also know that if that first thing that you do in nonprofit is not what you like and not what you want to do, the great thing is that you can always pivot and kind of see where the kind of areas of impact that you want to make are. Just once you get started and start learning that skill set, it starts to become transferable wherever else you go.
I'm going to also piggyback off of everything Dia and Soyan, am I pronouncing it correctly? Said, because I think you do have to do a lot of research in terms of the nonprofit sector, and what all is out there can be very surprising. When I was finished with my grad program and I started looking for jobs, there were so many jobs that I became introduced to that I had no idea about, even though I spent 2 years learning about the nonprofit sector. So I'm going to drop a website in the chat. I utilize idealist.org, which I love. I still use it to this day. It's how I found my now current role. But what I love about that website is all of the organizations are mission driven, and most of them are nonprofit organizations. And you can filter it through a different issue area. So I literally go on that website, go to the filter, go to education, and see what jobs are available. And that helps me figure out what all is out there. And I definitely agree, if you do work in a smaller nonprofit, you will wear multiple hats, because just in terms of funding and the capacity of the organization, you might have to do different types of roles, which is why I was backpacking on one day and doing college applications the next. But I think that is a great way to figure out what it is that you want and what you don't want. From my personal experience, I transitioned from the college success director role to my role now because I felt like I was moving away from the groundwork, and I really love working with students. Like, that's what I'm very passionate about. And I was learning that as in my new role, I wasn't really doing much of that. So that's why I wanted to transition. So I think figuring out what you like and what you don't like, and trying out new things, like maybe you've never written a grant, but after you are tasked with helping to create one or write one, that's probably something that you want to do. Maybe you haven't taken over the Instagram page for a nonprofit organization, but if you do that and you love it and you love going live, there are actual communication jobs for nonprofit organizations where you can do that type of work. So I definitely do encourage, if you are in a nonprofit and a smaller one, to take on those new opportunities. But also, big piece of advice is to take care of yourself, because sometimes the work within the nonprofit sector can be very triggering. I work with students who were just like me when I was coming up in a low income family, broken family. So making sure that you take care of yourself is really important, because this work is very taxing. But as everyone mentioned, it's also very impactful. So try to find that balance with what it is that you are doing in your day to day and how it can impact your mental health, but also still figuring out how you can make impactful changes for the constituents or the people that you're serving, because what we do is really important work. So
yeah, I definitely agree with that and with what everyone else said. And I know that internships have already been mentioned, but I think it's also good to keep in mind that it's a way to test things out for a shorter period of time. You could do an internship at this type of nonprofit one semester, that type the next, a different role over the summer. And so that's kind of a good way to get an understanding of what you might like to do. And then also just talk to people in the field, find out what their first steps were, kind of like this panel discussion. So that's a good first step.
Awesome. For students in the room, we are reaching our final question. So prepare your questions. You could start dropping them in the chat. If you, want to unmute yourself when the time comes, you can do that as well. So my final question for our panelists is a little bit of a weighted one. What are your hopes for your own career and for your profession in general?
I can start. So for my own career, I've been working remotely through 3 moves now. We're now settled outside of Chicago, I think for the long term. So I would like to find something hybrid, go back to in person. There's lots of benefits to being fully remote, but I miss seeing people. I miss leaving my house, and I'm guessing a lot of people on this call lived through Zoom school. So you might have a sense of that. And just when I think about, getting settled somewhere in Chicago, ideally at a cultural nonprofit, part of that is knowing I might have to take a few steps back to get to know the funders in this area, because, there's different funding sources, different major donors, and different ways of doing things. So kind of taking that opportunity to recognize that the change of location might also lead to some learning. And for my field, the arts got hit really hard during the pandemic. We're still recovering, especially the live performing arts. People are not coming back to the theater in the same ways they were. So I'm really hopeful that will change, and that we'll see an uptick, and that younger people will realize, because being in a theater, seeing a dance performance, a concert, like, it's so different than watching a movie or something on screen. And at Barnard, I think there's a lot of people who recognize the value of the arts. So again, if it's not your thing, then by all means, don't do it. But even if you're not going to go into the field of arts and culture, I think it's still nice to think about how it could be part of your life. So that's just a personal plug.
I think I've been thinking a lot about the DEI work that needs to be done in nonprofits. Nonprofits have been traditionally, and I think it's now starting to move into more DEI active work, which is a really great time and much needed for the nonprofit world. So I think that's very top of mind, is somewhere where I'm going to work in the future, whether that is the IRC or somewhere else, is that going to line up with the ethos that I have of things I learned at Barnard, right? Like the importance of DEI, decolonization, et cetera, et cetera. So really thinking very carefully through what my role does to support DEI work, or may perpetuate some old issues. And then at the same time also of, I think Adara brought this up, of burnout. Burnout at nonprofits is incredibly common, just because of the amount of work that we take on is a lot, and we don't get paid that much in nonprofit. I think if you want to go into nonprofit, it's a very service-based role in the same ways that teachers are and other kind of service-based roles are. So really being mindful about, my mental health and burnout and things like that, of, when can things be too much, and really carefully thinking through about my career from those two lenses.
I think I'll second that as well. I think, I guess for myself, I'm very, I guess, conscious of like the impact I'm making, and making sure that whatever work I'm doing, that I feel like I am making a positive impact, not just in the community, but in the organization. And that, whether it means staying at SUPNO, or whether it means maybe the best thing is to move on and have a transition there as well. But, I second a lot of what Sayin said about the culture. And I think, right, being the head of an organization, I've had the opportunity to try and shift that culture a little bit. Unfortunately, I think what we see a lot of times in the nonprofit space is that we're kind of reproducing some of the toxic culture of corporate, but just in a space where we pay people less, but it's not necessarily that the people are treated better, and there's still a lot of hierarchy and things like that. So I think in the work that I'm doing, like, I'm very mindful of not reproducing kind of what maybe I'm used to in a corporate setting, and having a place that is less top heavy, where it is much more inclusive, not just in terms of like DEI and who we hire, but also just in terms of how people have a voice in the work that's being done, not just the staff, but the community as well. And that also that we actually hire from the community, right? One of the big issues that has been in nonprofit is that so many of nonprofits are led by white men oftentimes, but even white women, and they serve communities of color. And so I took over actually from a white woman who started an organization, right, for South Asian community. And so I think that was the first time for our organization that we had someone from the community actually leading an organization for the community. And I think that's something really important to think about as we do this work, is actually having and hiring people from the communities we serve and giving them a voice and a space in the organization, and not just kind of telling people, because even myself, right, having been to Barnard, things like that, I am slightly different than some of the people we serve. And so just being conscious of not kind of superimposing all my ideas and what I think is best for a community, but actually giving them space to also tell me what they need and what is they think is best, or like what help that they need, rather than it always being kind of top down. And to speak to the salary as well, I think one of my hopes for nonprofit is that it is kind of seen and valued as a necessary part of community. I think we saw during the pandemic, right, that you can have all sorts of policies, you can do all sorts of things, but unless you actually have nonprofits on the ground, community-based organizations, right? Like we couldn't even get people vaccinated without community organizations, right? Like community organizations were the ones getting people funding, preventing people from evictions, preventing domestic violence, like all of that work, like the money that was coming in through excluded worker funds or renters assistance, right? None of that was getting to our community without us actually being that bridge. And so my hope is that we actually continue to value nonprofits for the work that we're doing, and actually pay employees, right? Give them benefits, give them living wages, because, right, the work is essential, and it's really not fair that it's not treated that way. And also that the funding is more equitable, right? If you look at budget, we do work also in budget equity, right? Even if you look at communities of color, the segments of New York City budget that go to the communities of color are really small, right? Asians make up 18% of New York City population and only get like 2% of social service dollars. So there's still a lot of inequity, even within kind of how funding and things like that goes to nonprofits. So I think there's a lot of work to be done on a lot of levels.
Yeah, I echoing what everyone said, I feel like I can't add too much to it, but to Dia's point, hopefully for the nonprofit sector as a whole, that value is provided and given and understood, because nonprofit organizations are doing the work. And it's interesting, one of my classes from my grad program, a line that really resonated with me was from one of our readings, was that a perfect world would be a world without nonprofits, but we exist because we have to do the work that the systems that are in place that should be doing the work aren't doing. So that's one of the things I've been trying to tussle with for my own professional career, is if I want to transition into another sector potentially, to bring this grassroots work into that space, because I think that's what's missing in the public sector. That's what's missing in the private sector, in these spaces where the policies are being created and approved, but the work it's not reaching those who it should be impacting in a comprehensive way, in an equitable way. So I'm still on the fence, but I'm very value driven and mission driven in terms of the work that I do every day. Because as all of our panelists mentioned, like doing something that you know has an impact and doing something that you are happy with and makes you feel good about the work that you're putting into society is something that I always hold at the forefront. So I don't know if I see myself transitioning anytime soon, but if I do stay within the nonprofit sector, I hope that these changes that all of our panelists talked about are something that is reachable and something that we can attain in our time, so that for all of you, if you all are interested in going into the nonprofit sector after graduating, you have a better space to go into.
Thank you all so much for the care that you put into the responses for that final question. That was really, really thoughtful, so informative. I want to open up the floor to our students in the room. I think we have about 30 students in the room. And I'm actually seeing one now in the chat by Mergen. I hope I am pronouncing your name correctly. Do the nonprofits the panelists work at have a campus ambassador program? What are the challenges and advantages for nonprofits to have campus ambassador programs / student organizations? And anyone can jump in to respond to Morgan's question.
So we don't have a campus ambassador program. We have worked with students at various colleges, including Barnard. We actually did have a Barnard intern or this summer. We also work through the SYEP program at CUNY. So we get a lot of college interns that way. But we've also found successful working with campus like student groups. So we've worked with we're working right now. Columbia has a student group, oddly enough, that's also named Sapna. That's a South Asian student group. So we've worked with them. We've worked with Club Bangla as well, which is a Bengali students organization. So we found those partnerships also be helpful for different things that we've done as well.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that question. I know where I work, we don't have a campus ambassador program, but there are organizations that do have like different chapters on college campuses. I know as an example, like Camp Kesem, which is an organization that supports students who have parents impacted by cancer. I know there's multiple chapters on different campuses, but they do exist. It's just that I know for our organization, we don't have one.
Great. We'll move into Julia's question. Julia, you can unmute yourself or you can also write in the chat, whatever you prefer.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate what everyone shared today. Thank you. I am a returning student at Barnard. I was doing a lot of work in the arts and a lot of commercial photography and videography where I would partner with established environmental and humanitarian organizations to create like some sort of campaign that supported structural change. And before the COVID lockdown, there was so much, like, it was so easy. It was just so easy to engage with organizations. There seemed to be so much lively momentum around that. And then since the lockdown, my experience from the outside has been so different. And I was wondering if anyone had any insight around that. You know, if there's been a change on just how nonprofits are relating and engaging.
Julia, I want to make sure, and Julia's, thanks for your question. And I'm so sorry if I misunderstood it. So call me out if I did. But I do think that there is a sense of momentum coming back right now. I'm not sure specifically about the arts, but I know in humanitarian work, there's been ever more like a pressing need for people to get involved and for engagement. So I think that there has been an uptick. I do think that organizations do remain cautious around the nature of work now with COVID being remote and, you know, kind of not always up front and center, but I have seen on the humanitarian side that there is like kind of this slowly growing uptick and almost like a cautious uptick, I want to say, in getting
Yay, amazing. Good news.
Yeah, I think we did have like right, COVID was a time, I think, for a lot of organizations to figure out kind of how to do the work we do and to meet the needs in the community. So I think for like us at SUPNA, it meant that we took a look kind of at what our mission is at a more basic level, right? Like when we think about health, you know, during the pandemic, we're not talking about like diabetes and cancer prevention. We're talking about like, do people have food on the table? And do they have access to shelter, right? So it's still kind of the same mission, but on a very like basic level for like women's empowerment, we moved a lot to less like job training and stuff like that into domestic violence, because it's what we were seeing arise in. So I think it just meant that a lot of our work shifted, and how we were engaging volunteers changed. So we actually did have a lot of volunteers work with us through the pandemic, but it was mostly in our food pantry. So we started a food pantry, and we wouldn't have honestly been able to do it without the volunteers who came every week and distributed food and packaged food. But I think a lot of the other kind of ways, maybe like kind of thinking of what you said, we're photographers and stuff, we've had that before as well. Like those kind of volunteer opportunities, I think were a little less because it was kind of a shift in the type of work. But I can say that we are doing like a lot more in-person stuff in other areas as well now. So I'm hopeful that you'll be able to find maybe ways to be engaged, more so now that things are starting to kind of shift a tiny bit.
Amazing. Thank you.
Okay. Moving into Stella's question, and Annika, I see yours as well. And this is a question that our students ask quite frequently within advising sessions as well. What advice do you have for students who hope to work in nonprofits post-grad and want to find jobs that pay a living wage?
I'll just start by saying that a lot more jobs now post their salaries. I think in New York City, right, it's required. So that's a good way to start. I will also say that with more experience, you do get to that point. Sometimes the entry level jobs, and I know this isn't the answer you want to hear, but sometimes the entry level jobs are pretty low. And I live with 2 roommates, and I was able to live. So it's just a matter of where you want to compromise. But then 10 years down the line, you do have that income depending on your sector. So I don't think it's across the board terrible.
I think
Yeah,
also the larger the nonprofit, the probably better your overall salaries generally are, as well as like benefits too. So if you're thinking about not just like your salary, but asking about like bonuses or health insurance and other types of like 401k, those kind of things as well. Generally, the a little bit larger nonprofits have a better ability to offer some of those benefits and maybe slightly larger, higher pay as well.
In those initial years of feeling a little bit of the purse pinching a little bit, was I also worked another job. It was kind of like like an hourly based job, but it was kind of this realization of, the first couple years it wasn't great. And then after that, once I started moving up the ladder, it became a lot better. But yeah, and I think always, advocate for yourself when you go to salaries. And this is not just limited to nonprofits, but this is wherever you go, is really advocate for yourself and really advocate for those benefits and for that salary that you want. And, that's something that I encourage across the board.
Yeah, I was just gonna piggyback off of what Soyeon said in terms of salary negotiation, and probably doing your research a little bit. If you found a position that you're interested in applying for, potentially doing a little bit of research and seeing what the typical salary range is for that role. For instance, for myself, I found a college counselor position, but I looked at other college counselor positions in California, in Los Angeles specifically, to see what that salary range was, so that if I did need to go in and negotiate after the offer, I did have that background information that sometimes is requested when you're negotiating your salary. And at the end of the day, I tell my students all the time, like, it doesn't hurt to ask. The worst they can say is no. So still go in with that initial thought of negotiating your salary, because it can give you a little bit of a bump. I did that with my current role now. And it was the first time I also negotiated my salary. That's something that historically women, especially women of color, do not do. So it was kind of nerve-wracking, but it worked. So I definitely think you should negotiate your salary. And same in California, a lot of the jobs do post their salaries because of salary transparency laws that are being passed throughout the country, which is really helpful. So I think one of the things that you can do is if you're looking for jobs and sifting through and you see that that salary range isn't something that you're comfortable with, you do have the ability to look for other opportunities that are more in the range that you're comfortable with. But as with everyone said, as you move up, it does get a lot better. And I have seen that for myself since starting within the sector in 2019. So it's been pretty rewarding for over the past 4 years already. So hopefully that's a little comforting for some that are worrying about the salary, because that was me when I was thinking about going into this sector.
Adira, I was muted, but I was applauding your successful salary negotiation. So congratulations on that. Annika's question, what technical skills do you think are important to know? And I think, Hannah, you touched on using math for your role. It seems like that's the example that Annika gave as well.
Yeah, so I'll just expand on that a little. Just I work with budgets a lot, and so just kind of having a decent understanding of working with numbers. I did, even during my internships, I realized I never really got up to speed on using Excel. It was just never part of my coursework. I was a philosophy major. So I got someone to teach me Excel, and I use it every day. So that's a very specific technical skill.
I was going to add to that point earlier about storytelling does require a little bit of data analysis. I don't use, well, I use Excel, but I'm not an expert. It's funny, my roommate is an expert in Excel, and I go to him sometimes like, can you just look at this data and put it in a easy, digestible way for me to tell a story? Because sometimes you do have to come with data points within presentations or within grants. So that really does help with your storytelling. So any type of quantitative analysis that you can grasp while you're at Barnard in simple statistics or being able to put together percentages, things like that will definitely help with the storytelling of whatever industry you're in within the nonprofit sector. Because I use it in education, being able to say the percentage of students that are persisting year over year, or the percent of students that are dropping from their post-secondary program. And I do that almost every day. So that's one hard skill I think would really benefit, whether you're in education, housing, food insecurity, that would really help.
So to be frank, I almost failed economics at Barnard. So I'm not sure why they let me fundraise. But I think part of it is presentation skills are really, really important. Being able to speak and to storytell, it's not just limited to writing and grants, but also being able to share it out with different people. And then also in terms of being able to use systems, a lot of nonprofits, like the for-profit world, is on Salesforce or on Razor's Edge or all these different kind of CRMs. So any kind of skills that you could build in that will be incredibly helpful. And, you know, Excel, I think, is something that you can learn along the way, and people will always be eager to learn. So, and, you know, a lot of the CRMs and Salesforce and things like that will do a lot of that work for you. So, you know, those are kind of the hard skills that I would work on or try to get more experience in, because that is something that nonprofits are kind of eager to look for.
Yeah, I would agree. I think with all of those, math is definitely something I use. Right? Like I use it not just like Adira was saying in the stats, like it's really important when I go into meetings to be able to say like 20% of the women we serve are also survivors of domestic abuse, or that like 100% of the people who do this program graduate, you know, whatever it is. I think that's important, but also in terms of finances. So I also do like finances for our organization. So I have to create budgets. I have to figure out, right, your salary, how I'm going to pay for that salary, how that salary is going to be allocated across different grants. So that percentages comes, right, cost allocation, things like that are really important. Also just creating budgets, right, for a specific program. So not just if you're in my role, but if you're like, say, a program director or something like that, being able to say like, this is my budget, this is how much I'm going to spend on, I don't know if you're doing computer class, right? These are the budget for actually purchasing computers. This is the budget for like personnel. These are like the fringe costs. This is the cost of space, right? This is the cost of the internet, right? Like being able to actually quantify all the costs and putting it together into a budget is really important. And it's actually really important for grant applications as well, right? When you're asking for money, they're going to want to know, why are you asking for it and what are you going to spend it on? So a lot of them will ask for budgets there. So I think that's been kind of a really important thing in the work I've done in a lot of different ways. I also think something that's been helpful, not just for my work, but also in some of my other staff, is having like design skills. So being able to use things like Canva or Adobe, like Photoshop, like any of those kind of things, I think can be helpful, particularly if you go into like a communications side, right? Like I also do some of our work in terms of like communications or social media, or like creating like outreach material, for example. And for a lot of that, we use Canva a lot. So just having some of those skills, I think, are helpful too. And then I think, Adira, you were talking about presentation skills. I think, right, just presentation skills, but also in like different settings, not just like a full presentation, but also like being able to like public speaking in general in different ways. So like I have to do press conferences, I have to do meetings with elected officials. I have to like be in meetings where I'm going to step up and talk. And so just having a comfort level with that also, again, depending on what role. So I think a lot of it is thinking about what role you want and what skills you might need for that, because the same things you're not necessarily going to need in everything. But I think some of these skills have been, for me, kind of in different areas, been really helpful. And then also just like writing skills, like having good grammar, having good like sentence structure, like being able to quickly produce like a quality written material, whether it's giving quotes or grants or whatever reports. Like you have to report on grants too, right? Like what work did you do? I think that's also been helpful too.
Awesome. So we only have a couple more minutes left on the clock, and I want to be respectful of our panelists' time. And so we'll do one more question. I'm seeing that Solmi wrote in the chat, what values have you found to be important or guiding in your work?
I can start. I think the idea of teamwork, I don't know if that's a value, but we're all, me and my colleagues, we're working together for a specific purpose, and recognizing everyone's role in that, really seeing the importance of everyone's contribution is really helpful, and then you get the respect on both ends. And the other value is, I don't know if it's exactly a value, but at least just something to note in fundraising, like the people you're talking to have your same values. So you know that you're on the same wavelength, and it's just a matter of really sharing with them what you're doing, what you can achieve with their funding, because they already think what you're doing is important. You just have to kind of get them to that next level.
I think for me, I guess two things. One, I touched, I think, a little bit on, but like equity and just thinking about what that means in kind of all the different areas, both internally to the organization, as well as like the work that we do outwardly as well. And having that equity be not just for kind of the communities I'm serving, but kind of realizing that there is a sort of collective solidarity that needs to happen, and that, right, whether it's immigrant communities or community of color or vulnerable communities or whatever community it is, that kind of the success of, right, my organization alone isn't really a success for the larger kind of community. So sometimes it means maybe I don't apply for funding, or maybe I suggest it to someone else, or maybe I support someone else's ask, even if it's not something that'll directly help me, because part of it is just working towards that like larger mission as well. And so there is kind of that collective work that I think is really important for all of our success and all of our kind of ability to do the work. I think so often, right, that organizations, right, in nonprofit, there can be a lot of competition. There can be kind of that sense that you're fighting for these scraps, that these pennies, but kind of thinking about more of an abundance mindset, and that there is money, right? There is there are resources. It's just a choice of how we're allocating them. And so if we kind of band together, if we work together, there's a lot more impact that can be made, and that like your success should be my success and vice versa. So just kind of taking, I guess, in terms of values that I'm not trying to kind of perpetuate is that competition and that scarcity kind of mindset as well. And I think the other one is just empathy. Right, the people we're working with are people who are struggling in so many ways. And right, sometimes the choices they make might seem foreign to me or might seem strange to me, but just like understanding that people are struggling and that people need help, and whatever choices they make, my work is to try and give them resources, and but not to tell people what to do, to have understand kind of they make their choices, and I'm just here to try to hopefully make things a bit easier.
Yeah, I was just gonna say something similar to what Diaz just shared, of having empathy and just understanding. And I think working within education is ever changing, especially after the pandemic and what students are interested in pursuing. I really had to understand that success looks different for everyone. It might not look like within the education sector specifically going to a four-year college. It may look like going into a community college or going into a career and technical program. So that's been something that I've had to grow to understand, because a lot of my background and research has focused on one specific trajectory. So I think just having that flexibility in the work that you do, and understanding and empathizing with those that you're serving, will help you figure out the best ways to support them, because there's more than one way of doing things. And I think that's helped me guide students a little bit more. I can't find the best word to put it, but comprehensively, truthfully, like it's just been very beneficial for me in understanding that not every student is going to do it the way that you may have done it, or you learned how to counsel them or support them.
Yeah, I can close out, but I think everyone touched on this at some point throughout the conversation, which is, why do you do this work, and what values do you hold dear, and what do you really love? I think it's really hard to work at a nonprofit where you don't share the same passion as your colleagues for the work that you're doing. So whether it's something that you picked up at Barnard that you love, if there's a personal identity or personal history that's really closely tied to your work, I think that's what really grounds me, is that personal connection, and being able to kind of share that with, externally work, donors that I work with, and tell them that, the work that I do is personally tied for this reason. Why are you tied to your, to our work that we do here? And also kind of similarly on the idea of, empowering the communities. At the end of the day, I know the work that nonprofits do on the surface can maybe seem a little bit like kind of unsure about how deep our work makes an impact in our communities, and really making sure at the end of the day that we're empowering whichever population that we're working with, and making sure that they have what they need and the resources, and kind of this equity idea of, and the transfer of wealth and things like that that are now very topical. How can we facilitate those things?
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Thank you again to our panelists for joining us today and providing such thoughtful insight. For our panelists, you'll be hearing from me. I'll put everyone in an email so that contact information can be exchanged if you'd like. For our students, we hope to see you at our Career Insights events in the spring. And everyone have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.